What up? You made it to behind the scenes. Designer Desmond here. Just wanted to say that some visuals may be intense, but the primary focus is on conveying a profound artistic message rather than promoting any violence. So I started in Mid-Journey, I think Blackfish Tree Cinematic Octane Render or something like that. I don't know. This is the one that I liked. So brought that into Photoshop, created a little background for it. I put black behind it so I could see how well I was cropping out the mountains. It's always this weird rim light. Alright, so then I get my Hangman here and I color adjust him. Get a noose for him, and then I'm like, oh, fuck all this black stuff. I'm gonna get this stuff off of here. Then you gotta break somebody's neck sometimes to get stuff done. You know how it goes. So I'm compositing this together. I realized the color adjustments kind of wore off. I had to use the neuro filter, so I had to sign in. I don't really update that much, so I got that message. Then I open up the 3D program, looking at my reference. I'm like, okay, I got a tree here. I got a mountain behind that, so I duplicate the tree, switch that into a mountain after I hook up my nodes or whatever. Then I believe I duplicate the mountain again. That's gonna be the sky. I go ahead and make that bigger, try to see what it's gonna look like through the render view. I'm like, oh, this looks really blue, but I sort of like it. So I bring in some water. You can't really see it from the image that I made, but I could, just visually looking at it, there's a big gap of water between the mountains in the background there. So I try to project that onto some geometry. It's having some issues because it's a flat, like you have to project the camera at it and the angle that it's coming from. It just wasn't giving me that much coverage. I'm like, all right, screw it. I'll deal with that later. Let me go ahead and build the rest of the scene out. Then I'm like, let me try one more time. So then I use the triplanar node, and that kind of works for me. So I start getting it to look a little bit more like water instead of just the color. Trying to line this up, but for the life of me, it's tenuous at best, but we're making it work, right? So I bust out a little render. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm liking this blue tinting. Let me throw some rocks up in here to match the background rocks. So I'm hand placing them, and then I'm like, this is gonna take forever. How about I just distribute them along some geometry, give it a little bit of randomness, change the size of a couple of them. I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah, that's not gonna work. We need a lot more rocks for what I want to do. So I'm like, all right, okay, cool. Let me get some dirt for underneath the rocks. I adjust some of the textures on it so I can get some displacement because it was looking pretty flat. Yeah, so now that I got that worked out, I'm realizing this water is not enough. So I try to use the generative fill tool. It's like new AI stuff inside of Photoshop. It just kept making mountains, so I went on to freepik.com, got myself water texture. Then I used that instead of what I had made in Photoshop because it just wasn't enough coverage for how much water I decided I wanted. In the end, I was like, I want all these rocks surrounded by water. All right, so now I'm adding some volumetric fog so I can get some atmosphere in there. I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna give us some nice depth right here. So now I'm trying to introduce some of those warmer colors into it, but I'm kind of battling if I like it warm or cold. I wanted a longer runway so I have more of a reveal, so that's what you saw, those rocks being stretched out there. Still messing with the smoke. I'm like, this thing looked like LA traffic. Let me put some noise pattern in here. Okay, so then that looked pretty good. So I'm trying to frame up this camera. How do I want this shot to end? I'm like, it's a little bit too high, but I like to see the water. I'm like, nah, let's go down a little bit. I'm still tweaking with it, trying to figure out the color I want. So then I'm like, ooh, I like this night scene kind of thing. But then I'm like, nah, it's all silhouette-y. Let me just make it so people could actually see it. So then I try to get the temperature in there. I'm realizing all my fog smoke is pure white, so I add some yellow to it, environment light, that's basically casting color onto the scene and to my atmospheric fog. But then I'm noticing like it's got a lot more like color towards the tree because that's the source of the light. But I'm like, yeah, I like that. So then I just add some post effects, try to get my timing render out. So I set up a timing render. So I look at that a couple of times. I'm like, yeah, it's all right. I can work with that. So I proceed to cut or feather the edge of this mountain out because I noticed that there's like this line at the top of it because the old lighting that the photo came from. So once I fixed that, I was happy. Then I was like, all right, hold on, let me put this DesignerDesmond logo in their face. Not big enough. Let's go ahead, make it the whole background in one time. Then I realized since the light source at the front was doing most of the coloring, I put one behind the camera as well, just so I can get some nice even sepia like lighting. I was watching Oh Brother We're Out There like the other day or whatever, and they had really nice sepia for it. And it was around that time where people was doing the Lynch thing. But I'm like, all right, let's get some swang on this boy. If I had more time, I actually would have like put a cloth simulator. I would have cut out the robe, put a cloth simulator on it, had it blowing in the wind while it was swinging. But you know, time is everything. So I got another timing render out. I'm like, okay, that's too fast. Let me go ahead and adjust this camera.